Okay, it's recording. All right. Okay, so once again, this is under today's date, class 12, April 27th. There's some notes to look at. And if people run into issues with the Mixamo characters so that so the textures aren't being applied, you just need to select the character, go into materials tab, and extract the texture and materials to have them applied and save them in the same folder as where the characters are. And there's a few other notes. Okay, so again, under today's date, there's a link to this page where I upload all the example, the demo files. And so I'm using week 12 demo files. And I've opened this Unity project that has a couple scripts that I want to use. So I'm going to create a new scene and start from scratch. And I'll just call it NPC demo and open that scene. I'll create a plane, call it ground. Okay, so now it's behavior. It's everything at the 0, 1. Okay, good. I'll put 0, 0, 0 coordinate. And so, like I mentioned earlier, waypoints are a way to have an object moving from one location to the next location to the next location. And it can be used, you can think of it as patrolling. It's just a character or an object is just patrolling an area, but it's a way of making them look like they're animated and they're actually part of an environment. So I'm going to create an empty game object to hold all my waypoints. So I'll call it waypoints, and in it I could create, the waypoints don't have to be represented, like they don't have to actually show up as elements. They can just be actually, how many people have already know how to do this out of curiosity? Maybe it's in create with code, I don't remember, but okay, great. So they could just be empty game objects, or they could be hydrant or a cylinder or a 3D object. So I'll use different things to make that point. So I'll create another empty, and I'll call this waypoint 01. And let me set this up so that I'm going to give them tags so we can see them. So in the inspector, you can, since they're empty game objects, you can give them tags to be able to spot them. And see, the ground should be 0, 0, 0, point. So I'll create 4 of these. You know, the ground I'm going to make a lot bigger. I'll have it be 10 by 10, 10 on the X coordinate, and leave it as 1 since it's a plane on the Y, and then 10 on the Z coordinate. So, and spread these out. And I'll give this one a tag, icon, I mean, not a tag. So those icons are not visible until you get closer to them, but they are there. I'll add a third and a fourth. Three. And then the fourth one. Okay, so they all, yeah, they're all different coordinates, all four of them. And the script that I want to look at is titled Waypoints. So I commented these, and I made a note of why that this waypoint controller.cs, I kept it because there's some good links to some useful tutorials in it, but this one's the better option. And this one is primarily from the Unity Learn. There's a tutorial on waypoints. There's a public variable for the waypoints. So you'll be able to set how many waypoints you want to use, and then just drag from the hierarchy each of the waypoints. And you could create like a collection of waypoints and have different characters go to them in different order based on how you order them in the inspector. Then you can also add a speed for the character that's moving from one waypoint to the other. And you can also just have it cycle through from one waypoint, from 0 to the last waypoint. And then once once the last one is reached, it just loops back, and so it just endlessly keeps cycling from waypoint to waypoint. And this, so for the sake of example, I'll start off with just adding sphere. And I'll give it a material so we can see it. I'm going to set up the camera so that so we can view it from here. So for now, let's just imagine that sphere is I'm having it move from one waypoint to the other. So I'm gonna give it the script waypoints, and so with that script added as a component, there's this waypoints. I wonder if I can just drag them all at once. Let's see. It's gonna be tricky. So I could just drag them onto where it says waypoints, and they'll be added one after the other. Or since I know there's going to be 4 waypoints, I could just type in 4, and now it's waiting for game objects to be loaded in. And then there's a speed. I'm just going to see if this is working. Okay, so speed is very slow. I'm gonna double that, or maybe even let's go with 20. Okay, so it's just cycling from one waypoint. When it reaches the last one, it starts over, and it's just going from one to the other. If let's call this red. I'm adding a second sphere just for the sake of a quick example. And I will put it somewhere else. So with this one, I'll do the same thing of just add the waypoints and also set to 4, but this time I'll order them in a different order. And give it a different speed. And they're fine. They're just, if I were to put a barrier, so let's say create a cube and make it 10 by 5. No. Make it. So those spheres don't have a rigid body. So they'll just ignore that. I want to see what happens if I add a rigid body to one of them. I'm going to put the game down here. So the blue one, I put a rigid body on the blue one. And it just kind of gets stuck. It's trying to push through. Oh, huh. Push through somehow. That's interesting. And now it's trying to get to the next waypoint. So what I want to see, I was playing around with this yesterday, but is if I were to make that plane and the wall all into a nav mesh, and the blue sphere, a nav mesh agent, if it would figure its way around that wall. But for now, I want to switch to adding a character instead. So in the characters folder, there's this mannequin. So I'll add it, and I'm going to in the animations, there is, I just want walking. I guess I don't have one. I'm going to make a new animation controller. And just call it walking only. So there is, if you all remember, with Mixamo, I had to use Command D to break out the animations from what they so the triangles are the animations, and I already have it looped, time loop and loop pose. You can see that in the inspector if you select the animation or double click it in the animation in the Animator Controller. Let's see if this is. So I'm going to add an Animator Controller or an animator to this, and I'll add walking only as the controller. Okay, so it's just walking in place. So I'll go ahead and give that mannequin the same waypoint script. And I'll add the same, I'll have them going in different order again for backwards. Okay, so the mannequin's walking around. First goes to the fourth one, then the third one, second one, and the last one. It doesn't have a rigid body, so it's just walking through that wall. I'm gonna give it a rigid body and see what happens. And it should act like the same as the sphere. I'll make it a lot faster than 5. So you'll notice if we follow it, the walking animation won't be fast enough for the speed that I'm going to set this to, so it'll look odd. But oh, fell through the ground. Okay. So the rigid body has gravity turned on, and it fell to the ground because, does anybody remember what it's missing? It needs a collider, right? So I'm going to use a mesh collider. And up. So with the mesh collider, it's going to want so this came with a T-pose mesh from Mixamo, and I'm going to use that. I don't want it to be a trigger. Let's see. And its mesh is this chapter 36, CH36. Okay, so that should keep it from. I'm going to reset the camera to. Huh, it's interesting. So it forces its way through the wall. It doesn't care. And it has both a mesh collider and I'm gonna add another collider just to see if that keeps it from. I'll add a capsule collider. Oops. Okay, so I'm adding a capsule collider and giving it a height of 2 and making sure that the Y is on the 1 so that it's not down low. And I'm just trying out because I'm curious to see if I can keep it from going through the wall without adding a nav mesh, assuming that the nav mesh would. No, it went through it. Oh. Okay, so I'll try one more experiment. So what I was talking about earlier, that in a street scene, for example, I will add a ton of waypoints so that it goes around the buildings rather than through the buildings. This is the issue that I've been running into. So before moving on to the next example, I'm gonna take the ground. Where's that wall? Call this a wall. And I can see it's going through the plane, so I'm going to move it up. So I'm going to select both the ground and the wall. I already have the navigation tab open, but if you guys remember with the nav mesh, it's you go to Window, AI, Navigation, and I'm going to make sure that both of these elements in the inspector are set as static navigation static. And then I'm going to bake a nav mesh. Now I'm going to go to the mannequin idle or mannequin. Let's call this something else. Human. And make it a nav agent, nav mesh agent. Okay, I haven't been able to get this working as I think it should, but I want to try it just in case. See what happens. Yeah, it's not going around. It's stuck. Now it's trying to get through the wall. Okay, so my workaround has been, like I said, I just set up more waypoints so that it'll circle around the buildings. But there's the Unity Learn has a tutorial that somehow gets this working, and it hasn't worked for me. So I included in the link under today's notes if you want to take a look at it. All right, so moving on. So what I would do in this case is just leave that one alone. Move 2 over here maybe, and I don't know, somehow, add more waypoints so it goes around the building, around the wall, rather than trying to get through it. Yeah, now it's stuck behind the wall. Okay, so I'll leave that alone for now. But do you guys get the sense of what it is and how? Okay. Okay, great. All right. So the other script that I want to look at is chase. Again, for this, I combined a couple different tutorials, an old one from Unity 5 that's on YouTube, as well as from Unity Learn. And there's a public for the player, so what it is that this character should chase. And then static animator anim. This is to set up the interaction. So again, imagine so what I'm going to set up is a character that's initially idle. Then when the player walks up to it, it triggers the character to walk toward the player. And then if it's even closer, to attack the player. So that's all set up through an Animator Controller that is being targeted, that is being called anim in the script. So it's going to have this Animator Controller is going to have 3 states: is idle, is walking, and is attacking. And I'm going to use these names as Boolean variables. So remember, Booleans are either true or false. And so if the player is within 2.5 meters of the non-player character, it should attack. If it's further than 5 meters, it's just idle and ignoring everything. If the player is within 5 meters, then the non-player character should start walking toward the player. And I added comments so you guys can read through this. There's also this this line 30, effector 3 distance player dot position. This is the character, non-player character that chase is being applied to. Transfer position is less than 10 and the angle is less than 40. It should turn toward it. So what that means is that the non-player character has an angle of view that's 40 degrees wide. So if the player goes up behind it, the non-player character just ignores it. But if you walk around and walk toward it within that 40-degree perspective, then it'll shift toward the player. Okay, so I'm gonna set up, I'll add another one of these mannequin things. This time I'll call it enemy. And instead of just the main camera, I downloaded that super character controller. So I'm going to take the first person and I'll just call it player, or yeah. and I'll give it a tag of player. There's a few things that are automatically on, such as those stats on this first person controller. Where is it? The stamina system, maybe? Yeah. And okay. So I'm going to turn off the main camera. And where is the enemy? I'm also going to make the player a lot faster. Okay, I turned off the wrong thing. Enable movement, stamina system, footsteps, head bob. Survival stats. That's right. Put this back here. Okay, so this is the one that doesn't have anything going on. It's just the enemy. So in the animations, I'm going to create a new Animator Controller. Call it I'll just call it enemy. Any controller. And I'm going to add an idle to it as the initial state. Then this dance animation, which I'll use as the attack, and walking. Where's it? So I'll have it go, I'll add transitions. So right now, if I were to play this, it's just gonna loop from idle to walking to break off. Let's see what that looks like. This animation break off goes underground. In order to get it from going below the plane, I'd have to go to each of those keyframes and bump up the Y coordinate. But I'm going to leave it as is for now and add the animator to it and have it be the enemy controller. Okay, so title, then it goes into dancing. And that's what I was talking about. It goes below the plane and then cycles back, right? So I wanted to react to the player. And the way I do that is by setting up Boolean states in the animator. So at any point, I based on the distance of the player to this character, to any character that's going to use this animator and the chase script, I want it to be able to go from from idle to walking toward the player. And then if I get away or walk away from it, I want it to be able to go back from walking to idle. So I'm going to make a transition and add to it back. So at any one of these points, I want to make sure that it can jump from one to the other based on the distance of the player to the character that is using this animation controller. So if I walk away again, I want it to go from if I walk really closely and it's idling, I want to immediately be able to go to attacking, ignore this break off animation. And I wanted to also be immediately to switch as I walk away to switch from attacking to walking. So transitions, if I click on the transitions, it has exit time and it's by default turned on. That means that the animation will play out before it moves on to the next one. That's part of the transition. I don't want those animations to play out. I want it to happen immediately based on the distance. So I'm going to turn off has time for each one of these. Okay. And if I go back to my script, so is idle, is walking, is attacking. Those are the states that the script is looking for. So I'm going to add, if I click in the animator, if I click under the parameters, I can add different variable states. So I'm just going to use Booleans. So bool, and I'll call it is idle. And I'm mirroring what I wrote in the script. Is walking and is attacking. Make sure. So is idle, is walking, is attacking. And you can take this script and modify it any way you want. Like if there's here I'm just using pretty standard common states for interaction in say a game. But it could be is talking, whatever it is that you're using to target inside of the animator, you want to make sure that it's the same Boolean name inside the animator. So here it's targeting is idle when the player is nowhere nearby, then is walking when the player is within 5 meters, and then is attacking when the player is within 2.5 meters. And so this is all in the update. So remember, the update is called every frame that the application's running. So it's just constantly checking on where the player is in from the non-player character that is going to have chase applied to it. So is idle, is walking, is attacking. Okay. So now is idle it's gonna start with that by default. I can check it off here, but it's going to start there by default. This is just saying this is the first one that should play. And then I want to add a value to each of these transitions. So idle anim. Okay, so these are referred to as conditions. So on this transition, I want it to go from idle to attacking. So I'm going to add a condition, and I want it to be not if idle is true, but if attacking is true. So this transition from idle to break off, which again, imagine it's attacking. I want that transition to happen is if attacking is true. If the distance is such that the character should go back to an idle state, I want that transition to happen if idle is true. So I'm selecting the transition between break off anim to idle anim, and I'm going to add a condition, and idle is listed first, so it comes up by default initially, and that's great. Okay, so I want, if idle is true, I want the transition to go up there. So if it's true that the player is more than 5 meters away from the character that's going to have the chase script applied to it, it should run away. Or it should go, it should go back to idle. Walking. So if it's within 5 meters, I want the non-player character to start walking toward the player. So I'm going to add a condition, and I'm going to say is walking is true. And then if it's more than 5 meters, then it should go back to idle. So once again, is idle is true for that transition. So you can think of these transitions, just look at the direction that the arrow is going on, and that's the condition that I want to be true. So if it's walking and it gets within 2.5 meters, I want it to go to attack, which is, so I want is attacking to be true. And this one is going from break off, which is the attack animation, to walking. So I want walking to be true. So the script accesses, so the script is going to have, is a script chase is going to be applied to enemy. So I'm going to go back to assets. I'm going to go into my scripts folder, and I'm going to apply chase to this enemy. So now with that script added, what is it that it's reacting to? What is the player? So the script has this public variable, public transform player. And this is I see it as a field in the inspector because it's a public variable. And I'm going to add the first person player controller to that. So now the distance that it's monitoring is for the player. So if let's see if this works. So I'm going to walk up to it, and it starts walking toward me. I'm running away from it. But now if I let it walk closer to me, or if I walk closer to it, again, I'm using this breakdancing animation, but imagine it was attacking. And so it's going to stay in that animation loop over and over and over until I try to get away from it. And if I try to get away from it, it'll walk toward me. But if I really, just actually, I can get behind the character. I can get behind it too. So if I get behind it, I'm outside of its field of. Let's see. So I'm outside of its field of view, and so it just goes to idle. If I get back in front of it, within its field of view, oh, no, attacking. It's back to walking toward me. So it's a good idea to set up the speed of your first person controller so that you can actually run away from okay, I'm just going to stop that. So that script depends on two things, right? It depends on what the script is being applied to, having an animator controller, and that animator controller, in this case, having very specific Boolean variables. And in this case, it's idle, is walking, is attacking, and then having transitions so that when the distance from the player, which is being assigned here in the inspector for the character that has the chase script applied to it, it's monitoring the distance from, in this case, enemy, the distance between the enemy and the player, and then it's jumping from one transition to the other transition based on that distance. And again, so in the script I added the tutorials that you can review to understand what's going on, and then comments. I tried to comment everything in it to explain what it's doing. So, but this, like right away, you can have some basic interactivity with non-player characters that are roaming your world. And I'm curious, actually, let's see what happens. So I have that other human that's just waypoints. I want to see what happens if I add chase to it. And this is just occurring to me. I have no idea what's going to happen, but where's that one? Oh, it doesn't like that. It just gets stuck. Oops. So now I get close to it and it triggered it to go, but it's not, I can't catch up to it. Oh, you know what? It's not going to work. It doesn't have the right animator controller. That one just has a walk. It's just walking. So, all right, you guys can mess around with that. I want to get to one other thing. I'm going to close this tab so I can open it from scratch. So in the audio folder, there's three audio MP3s. One is an interview that you guys have heard before. Okay, so there's, and then there's a couple sound effects. And then there's an ambient sound, which is a wind. I can barely hear. So if I can just add these sounds I could create empty game objects and add audio sources, or I can just go ahead and drag them into the space, into this hierarchy. And I'm just going to spread these out. And I also want to give them tags. Okay, so I have these different sounds and the tags so we can see them. By default, they're 2D sounds. You can set them as 3D sounds in their inspector under audio source. But I'll leave them as 2D sounds, and I'll have them looping. And it's going to be really loud.
When it implodes, let's say it implodes. When it implodes, do you think?
Okay, so it's just a bunch of noise all at once. But built into Unity, there's an audio mixer that you can add to your project. So I'm going to go to create and choose audio mixer. And I'll call it demo mixer. So if you double click into it, it'll open a new tab, and so I'm inside demo mixer, and there's a master. So if I say go to any one of these sounds, under the audio source, there's an output, and the output, if you've created an audio mixer, you can choose the output be the mixer. So just like having a mixer on a control board, you can use this get out of maximize. And I applied this to this SAM interview. So if I play this,
when it implodes, let's say it implodes. When it implodes,
I can edit in play mode.
There's something seriously wrong.
Actually, I'm going to create different groups for this. So the point of the mixer is to control the decibel level for different audio sounds. And okay, so there's a master that's there's a master with 3 subtracks: interview, AFX for audio effects, and ambient. And I'm going to go into SAM interview. Instead of being it being affected by the master, I want it to be affected by the interview. Sound, this is one of the effects. I'm going to have it follow whatever I have with AFX. The same with the second, sound 0, 1, which is just a game sound. And then wind, I'll have ambient applied to it. So the master is going to affect the audio of all three of these sounds. Let's set this back to 0. And so if I hit play, I get this edit in play mode.
When it implodes, let's say it implodes. When it implodes, do you think most people who did it, they're going to be like, I was an idiot, I made bad decisions? Or do you think they're going to be like, there's something seriously wrong with our financial system? They're going to be like, I was an idiot, I made bad decisions. When it implodes,
Okay, so for output, so there's one master that controls all the other tracks that belong to this master. Then I have different types of audio. So there's one that's interview, there's an effects, audio effects, and then there's an ambient, which is the wind. These are the AFX are both of the game sounds are being applied to it. When I hit edit in play mode, it's generating a script, and that script will be applied to your final build. So if you know you have all these sounds, but you don't like the way they're all coming together and creating a cacophony, you can have a mixer and then control how they behave. You can lower them all via the master. Bring up the interview if you want. bring this up if you want.
But like when it implodes, let's say it implodes. When it implodes, do you think most people who did it, I was an idiot, I made bad decisions?
And so the changes that I made in the master and all these 3 channels that are tied to the master, any changes that I made during play, again, were the code was generated that then is tied to the project so that in the final build, the audio effects are going to be pretty low, the interview will be a little bit higher, the master is set at 0 decibel level, and the wind is set really high. So this is just a way to sort of control when you have so many sounds going on. You can have different audio mixers and have them applied to different sounds within your project. So I'll stop there. This is just like a quick introduction so that people are aware that audio mixers are available and that it gets scripted into the final build of your project. Okay, so take a look at hopefully people can make use of either of these 2 scripts, Waypoints and Chase, in order for your non-player characters to become a little more activated. And then if you want to look at these other ones that are right now are broken, take a look at those. They're from different tutorials that I listed at the very top. And yeah, the reason I kept these around is because I felt like these tutorials are useful and they kind of work. They just need to be problem solved. So maybe programmers, those of you who are programmers can make good use of it. All right, so there's a sheet that I'm putting together for the final project, and I'll send a link to it over later today, and then we'll look at it more closely next week. And next week we'll look at building out for Oculus. Meanwhile, just keep thinking about your final project. Going back to. So the final projects will be due May 18th. And hopefully people, if you see that there's a conflict with one of your a final from one of your other classes with this time, just let me know ahead of time. But ideally we'll meet on May 18th for everybody to share their final projects. All right, any questions? Okay. I'll see you guys next week. And then if you have questions about either Chase or Waypoints, we can go back over it next week.